This is Duke University.
I hope you enjoyed lunch. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the third panel, Professor Jed Purdy. He's instead of listing off his professional accolades, which are in his bio, I just want to say he's been such a helpful professor all through my 3 years here. He's been very supportive of this topic, and he's just been another mentor to me, and I know to a lot of other students here. So let's welcome him.
Thank you, John. I genuinely appreciate that. So I'll be brief introducing two really interesting people so that they can come and talk to you about their work and their perspective. Our first speaker, Judy Kincaid, has done not a little bit of everything, but a lot of everything in this region and in this issue space. She's been a lawyer and a law teacher. She's been in charge of an intergovernmental sustainability and green policy initiative. She is, I think, a founder and director of Clean Energy Durham, has been a recipient of the INDY, the local Excellent Independent Paper Citizen of the Year Award recently, and is a LEED certified professional, which, as many of you know, is sort of the gold standard of private labeling certification, voluntary certification in this area. She'll be followed by the also outstanding Chris Brook, who is a public interest lawyer working on issues of social justice and its intersection with environment, among other things. A distinguished graduate of UNC as an undergraduate and as a law student. And now and I have to make sure that I get, with the Southern Coalition for Social Justice in Durham. Judy will go first. Judy Kincaid.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I want to start with a story. Several years ago, when the federal stimulus money started coming down, the General Assembly in North Carolina had a meeting of one of their subcommittees at which the then head of the state's low-income weatherization assistance program came and talked about their program because they were about to get a huge infusion of dollars, and these state legislators wanted to have some sense of what's this program, what are you guys doing? So I happened to be there because I was interested in this topic, and I was intrigued because as this guy was explaining the program and had some of his other program officers from around the state talking, one of the things they said was, and you need to know that a programmable thermostat is a very effective way of saving energy, by the way. One of the things he said was, these are what we do when we go into low-income homes and do these weatherizations. We do the insulation, we do this, and we do that, and the other thing. And we install programmable thermostats, but we don't install programmable thermostats for the senior citizens because they get too confused about how to use them. So I'm sitting back there and I'm saying to myself, well, that is exactly why we have Clean Energy Durham. And that's, in a nutshell, that's connected with the work that we do. And I'm going to tell you in a second what we do. But I want to link that story with three topics, which are behavior, technology, and jobs. Clean Energy Durham has been around as a 501c3 nonprofit since 2007. And our mission is to move America toward cleaner and safer energy by creating and educating organizations of neighbors teaching neighbors how to save energy. So we inspire and train neighborhood volunteers to learn about saving energy and do it in their homes and then teach their neighbors. It's a pay it forward kind of thing. So we have, from the beginning, had the vision that Durham would be our laboratory of innovation, and we would try out a lot of different techniques, and we would then create a high-quality, effective, replicable model that could be duplicated across North Carolina and across the country. So that's been our vision. We have now been in 36 different neighborhoods in Durham, from low wealth to high wealth, trying a whole variety of different programs and training and working with volunteers. Our staff is now 8 people, and plus we have some interns and fellows. We've had a variety of funding from grants and contracts with local, regional, and state government organizations, with foundations. And we also get a lot of funding from individual businesses and individuals from the Durham community who think the work that we're doing is really, really important. So the essence of our work is about volunteers, as I just said. And what we do is we have a couple of different really key kinds of activities that we do with volunteers. We have a lot, but the core of it is around 2 different kinds of workshops. And one is called Basic Energy Education. And the idea is that folks should know basic things about using energy in their homes, and most of us don't know a lot about it. And so it basically features 3 things. One is how energy is typically used and lost in a home, and what are the no-cost, low-cost things that you can do on your own to save energy. And then third is, if you have the money to hire a professional, where are you going to get the biggest bang for the buck? So, for example, it's insulating your, sealing your ductwork and sealing and insulating your attic floor. But most people don't know that. But when they understand energy flow, then it all becomes a little bit more clear. So anyway, that's basically in a nutshell what we do. Oh wait, that was the first workshop. The second workshop was the hands-on workshop, and that is teaches those same things, but then it's also taught with hands-on. You're handed a screwdriver and say, okay, this is how you install this door sweep. This is how you wrap your hot water heater. So it's do-it-yourself, no-cost, low-cost things, and we do it all with groups of neighbors. Neighbors learn together. So that's why that story about the thermostat was particularly engaging to me, is because we teach groups of neighbors together how to install and program a thermostat, and then when they forget, they call their neighbors, and their neighbors come back over 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 times and help them until they get it together. So you therefore have the benefit of having that programmable thermostat with that neighborhood group that you wouldn't necessarily have. So all of our program is based on volunteers, as I said, where we train, we inspire, and we get them engaged. I was inspired, because I've been here since the morning, to also share with you that 38% of the carbon dioxide emissions from the United States come from the residential sector, from our homes and from the driving decisions that are made. And that's larger than any of the other sectors, and it's also larger coming from the United States than any other country except for China. So when we talk about people about their energy uses in their home, we're really working on a very significant issue. So first I want to talk a little bit more about behavior, and share with you just a couple of statistics from a variety of different studies. There was a study that recently said that multi-pronged interventions have produced reductions of 15% or more of home energy use due to behavior-based actions alone. Okay? And people can do another 17% by implementing currently cost-effective non-behavior measures. So there's a lot of opportunity to save energy, and particularly for homes that are challenged financially, this is a really important thing for them to have more money in their budget that they can use for other things. A lot of people also don't know how to save energy. Another study that about called Energy Efficiency in the South, which came from people from right here at Duke University. One of the conclusions of that was that behavioral-related studies have shown that individuals do not know how much energy appliances or their homes use, do not know where energy comes from, assume new appliances are efficient, do not consider energy when they make purchasing decisions, and focus on upfront costs. Sometimes information barriers are compounded by lack of trusted, actionable information. That is where we're coming from when we designed this program some years ago. And one of the first things that we did when we set up Clean Energy Durham was that we went into 2 middle-class neighborhoods and went door to door and did a survey and got 180-some responses from people and asked a number of questions. But one of the questions that we asked was, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the most likely, how likely would it be that your household would participate in an energy-saving workshop in your neighborhood, a 2-hour energy-saving workshop in your neighborhood sponsored by your neighborhood association? Okay, well, how about if it was sponsored by the city or county and it was a citywide workshop? Or what if it was sponsored by Duke Energy? And so people were 41% more likely to attend it than if it was sponsored by the city or county citywide, and 47% more likely to attend it than if it was sponsored by Duke Energy. So that validated our theory of change. As someone was talking about theory of change earlier. Our theory of change is that neighbor-to-neighbor learning will be effective in driving the demand for the new energy economy deeper, wider, and faster than otherwise. So. This seems to be borne out by not only the research but our own personal surveying. A couple of subsequent studies after that survey, we did our survey in 2007, but a couple of more recent surveys were that engaging people's social networks and communities so that they receive messages not only from government or media, but also from their friends and neighbors appears to hold great promise, but the results seem to vary from one action to another, and more research is needed to identify how best to engage these networks. That totally validated what we were talking about. And then I won't read another one because I only have 5 minutes. I'm going to cover several different things. So we are learn, do, teach. That is our methodology. You learn something, you do it yourself, and then you teach your neighbors. So with the 2 kinds of workshops that I talked about, we have a viral approach that people do. And so we taught, for example, 13 of those hands-on workshops during a couple of months last year, and 57 households came to them. And I'm sorry, we didn't teach them. Well, never mind, it's a long story. But 57 households attended, and 44 of them we were able to get up with to find out what they did afterwards. 89% had done one or more of the projects. 73% said they changed their behavior as a result of it. And 52% of them taught somebody else. So of those 52% is 23 people. 23 people taught an additional 117 people in their neighborhood. The basic energy education one, which is just talking, it's not hands-on, we taught 8 people, and they taught an addition, within 6 months they had taught another 44 people in their neighborhood. So that's our model of learning this stuff going forward. And all this makes sense because your neighbors are trusted people, they're nearby, houses are similar, it makes sense to compare your energy use to people that are near you. So I want to quickly talk about technology. The story I told about the programmable thermostat illustrates when there's a new technology, people might not know how to use it, and so having a neighbor who's the first-line technical assistance can be really helpful. When it comes to where we're headed now with our smart meters and all that stuff, there is suspicion out there in some quarters about, wait a minute, Big Brother's, what's going on here? I don't even understand this. I'm not sure I trust, whatever. And so having neighbors who have experienced it and understand it and can actually explain it to neighbors is going to help us as we move forward with whatever the technology is. Whether it's switching to complex fluorescent light bulbs, and we have demonstrations of all the different kinds of lights that come from complex fluorescent light bulbs, or going to the new LED lights when those start coming down in cost and people want to do that, or anything, on-demand water heating or whatever it is, when people start getting it in their neighborhoods, being able to tell each other about it is really important. Third is jobs, and that's, as everybody knows, the federal stimulus dollars are drying up, and during the course of the expansion of weatherization assistance program and the stimulus money, there were a lot of people got trained. A lot of people are now not going to necessarily have jobs because they were stimulus funded. So what we're trying to do with our approach is we work not just in low wealth communities, we work in high wealth communities and everything in between. And so the idea is particularly with the people with more financial resources, we want them to understand how important it is to retrofit your home. And that creates jobs then for the people all throughout the community who have jobs in that sector. So that's really important. So our program is also a way to keep things going inexpensively when you don't have the federal stimulus money for your program. We're now at the point of we've rebranded our organization. We've extended into several into Warren County, which was mentioned earlier, and we're about to go into Raleigh in a couple of months, and we're going and beta testing our new rebranded program in several other beta test sites in North Carolina. So we're hoping to be national in the next couple of years. So my time's up. So thank you for listening, and I'll look forward to talking to you more during the question and answer session. Thanks.
Judy, thank you so much for that constructive and uplifting work. Chris Brook has authorized me to tell you that he promises to be a buzzkill.
Well, first off, thank you so much to the Duke Forum for Law and Social Change for having me here today. Thanks to John Doyle, who answered a lot of questions that I had about where to park and how to do that, and those sort of rather elementary things that I typically have trouble with. Thanks to Professor Purdy for the introduction. Greatly appreciate it. And as he indicated, Judy gets to talk about the wonderful things that come from clean energy, and I get to talk about some of the dangers of things that are being pitched as clean energy and focus on a particular case study that I worked on. So Judy gets to talk about the wonderful positives that can come, and I can talk about sort of the uglier human nature aspects that we can take advantage of clean energy to push things that are not clean and sort of older, more typical destructive things to communities of color and communities that have had historically problems with environmental injustices. As I am sure y'all talked about this morning, there's a long-standing problem with communities of color being disproportionately burdened by environmental impacts in communities, whether that is the siting of landfills, the siting of wastewater treatment facilities, heavy industrial uses. Those typically, studies have shown, end up in low-income African-American, Latino communities. And even when you control for wealth, you're still going to find these problems and burdens predominantly in African-American and Latino communities. So what I mean is poor African-American community is more likely to be the site for a landfill than a poor white community. So already off to a wonderful, fantastic, uplifting start. Feel y'all leaning forward. But how does this connect to sort of the green economy tradition? And what it is sort of an age-old phenomenon of sort of pitching environmental burdens, or in this case we talk about green energy opportunities as job producers to communities that have been excluded from the larger community's economic growth. And this can work, unfortunately, with the green economy. Judy talked, and President Obama talked in the State of the Union earlier this week about the burgeoning green energy economy, how many more jobs are being created in those economies. This is a wonderful way to sort of talk your way into communities that do not have a lot of investment. It can also be a way of sort of splitting constituencies that will typically find themselves allied. when I'm talking specifically here about folks that I would sort of label broadly as environmental voters, environmental constituencies, which, no surprise, tend to be overwhelmingly white, tend to be overwhelmingly upper middle class, if not upper class, a particular sort of white liberal. I think, we can imagine sort of an NRDC or an EDF meeting and get sort of, what I'm talking about. And then, folks who deal with environmental injustices, environmental burdens on a daily basis, overwhelmingly African American, overwhelmingly Latino, overwhelmingly poor individuals. So there's a way to sort of posit some of these opportunities that can appeal to one and sort of impact the other. I want to talk a little bit about work that I did in Greensboro. Anybody here from Greensboro, from Guilford County? Well, it is Duke, so that's not entirely surprising. I'm obligated to throw that in there as a Carolina graduate. That will be my one cheap shot. I think. So we worked with Northeast Greensboro community that is overwhelmingly African American. And give you an idea about how environmental justice is played out in Greensboro, the city has 2 wastewater treatment plants. Both of them are in Northeast Greensboro. The city has 2 landfills, one which is unlined and pre-RCRA regulatory regime, and one that is lined. Both of them are in Northeast Greensboro. Surprise, surprise, the poor, overwhelmingly African-American portion of Greensboro. The White Street landfill originally opened in 1943. The Army opened it in World War II. And had been sort of, I could talk forever about Greensboro politics. Obviously, the sit-ins are how a lot of folks know about Greensboro. Greensboro is a very typical city in that the east side of the city is predominantly black, the west side of the city is predominantly white, and there are folks that just don't have any interchange between East Greensboro, West Greensboro, West Greensboro, East Greensboro. But the landfill had been a very divisive issue in a very racially polarized town for a long period of time. And in 2001, the city council made a decision that they're going to close the landfill, and not entirely close it, but close it to municipal solid waste, which means fewer garbage trucks going in, less waste going in. And in 2005, it was closed. And what happened in 2007, what happened in 2008, we have an economic calamity, and Greensboro, like all cities, suddenly found themselves in a real big budget hole. And they, need to try to find a way out of that budget hole. And what conservative members of the city council start talking about at that point is we could use the White Street landfill as an exploratory ground for waste-to-energy technology that could not only save the community tons of money, but would much more, in a much more environmentally friendly way, use the energy that, landfills are potential huge sources of energy. So this is the starting point for the conversation. Let's tap into this resource that we have right here in our city limits. Now, how did this end up playing out? Very conservative city council was elected in 2009, and they started looking at reopening the landfill. And they get a lot of waste-to-energy proposals. And the same conservative folks who started talking about this as the entry point for this conversation are suddenly like, boy, the technology doesn't seem to quite be there yet. Boy, this is way more expensive than we imagined. But we could still save money by reopening the landfill and expanding it for 15 to 30 years. So we very quickly sort of, the mask slipped there. This was never about, sort of tapping into Greensboro's energy. It was always about saving money on folks that didn't vote for these particular members of the city council. And it was a very typical bait and switch. But they, we got involved in I guess, 2011. And, at that point, you have to say that it was not just conservative white members of the community that were pushing this. There were letters to the editor in the News and Record, the Greensboro paper, from folks in the community who had sort of been co-opted. And their message was, this is going to happen. We got to get used to it. we could at least get some jobs out of this if we'll just come to the table in good faith and negotiate. Obviously, folks had reached out to them, touched them, and talked to them about, you need to get on board before the bus leaves the station or you're going to be left behind entirely. Even, the city councilman who represents that district was sort of flirted with the idea of, waste energy technology as the way of reopening, and maybe reopening is not terrible, until he went to a series of sort of town halls with folks, and he did not get a favorable reception to those sort of ideas. So ultimately, in this case, what happened is, I have to say this, the mayor who was elected is a 71-year-old retired accountant who was a political neophyte who'd never held office before, who was a big Tea Party guy. And politics is the only job where apparently inexperience is a positive. So he's running Greensboro's third largest city as though it's sort of a country club meeting, and they're deciding what's going to be, offered at the wet bar for the next event. I mean, it was a horribly run city for this 2-year period of time, and they were absolutely inept in how they handled this landfill discussion. Greensboro, North Carolina doesn't have tons of particularly progressive environmental statutes on the books, but one area where they do have some progressive, at least procedural safeguards, and some substantive safeguards, relate to landfill expansions. And basically saying, we need to have public hearings if we're going to build a new landfill within a mile of another landfill. In this case, they already had one permitted portion of the White Street landfill, and so they were going to need to seek a new permit for another portion of the landfill. And to do that, you have to consider demographic impacts, you have to have a public meeting, you have to consider alternative sites. We wrote to them in 2011 and said, y'all should do this. And they said, we're not going to do this. So, we filed a complaint that was basically, the whole complaint was the poor summer clerks that we had last summer essentially watched about 4,000 hours of Greensboro City Council meetings and just wrote down quotes where they're like, we don't need to consider demographic impacts. We don't need to look at alternative sites. That doesn't make it particularly hard to win a case when the people that you're opposed to have sort of laid out that they're not going to do what they're statutorily obligated to do. So, in this case, there was a preliminary injunction entered that blocked the expansion. They ultimately tried to reopen the portion that was already permitted, and a city councilwoman who'd previously been conflicted out was allowed to vote again. This was a ridiculous soap opera, let me tell you about it. So they got sued by folks who opposed the landfill first. Then they got sued by folks who wanted to operate the landfill about whether this city councilwoman could vote. So that is, you're running your city in a fantastic fashion when you manage to be sued by everyone. And ultimately, she was allowed to vote. Even the efforts to reopen were tied 4-4. And so, at the moment we appear to, and then also wonderfully, 3 of the 4 city council persons who had voted for reopening and expanding the landfill were voted out of office in 2011 because they had, folks called them on the bait and switch that they'd pulled. They talked about clean energy, when in reality, what they were really about all the time was saving money on the backs of folks who'd been burdened by this landfill for generations. So you have sort of, at least in the short term, a good result there. But I think there's some, caveats and some key questions to ask when something is being pushed and being discussed as a clean energy opportunity for an economically depressed portion of a town. First off, when you hear that, when you hear this could be a great opportunity for your portion of the town, immediately please put your antenna up because you're probably being sold something that you're not going to like ultimately. But who is pushing this politically? And what level of commitment do they have to green energy? Is that what this is really about, or is there some sort of ulterior motive? And also, who is pushing this in the business community? Where is the funding coming from for the efforts that you're seeing behind these sort of clean energy pushes, and is it a smokescreen for something much, sort of more regressive, something much more sort of typical? And, this sort of fits into the broader implications, outside of environmental justice that I'm sure you've been discussing and will continue to discuss today, is, are environmental concerns, when push comes to shove, going to be thrown under the bus for other considerations? In this case, it was money that threw it under the bus, but, talking about fracking, natural gas burns cleaner, we have to get off of Saudi oil, there's always some sort of angle being pushed at you. Tar sands, we need, this domestic production of energy. So to wrap up, be a buzzkill, there are a lot of wonderful opportunities in this venue, and it's exciting. A lot of the work, hearing about the educational work that Judy is doing is wonderful. All I'm saying is sort of buyer beware, do your due diligence on these proposals that are being pitched, and make sure that you as someone who potentially has environmental interests also tries to familiarize yourself with other communities' interests and make sure that they see the challenges the same way that you do. Thanks, appreciate it.
Thanks, both of you. And because our speakers have been so disciplined, we have about 10 minutes for discussion. Let's get some thoughts, questions. Sir.
For the first speaker, I'm sorry I forgot your name, but what is the imperative for other community members to teach, or community members teach other community members? Why? What has motivated them to do that?
That's a great question. Some people are just community-minded, and we've had volunteers that put a lot of effort into their neighborhoods because they are dedicated to living in a community and in a neighborhood where there's a good quality of life and neighbors care about each other. Some people have the understanding that you get from Neighborhood Watch regarding safety and eyes on the street and just knowing who's in your neighborhood and having that whole sense of that neighborhood bonding creates to that. Some people are looking for volunteer activities. Some people just like to be know-it-alls, in a good way. There are a lot of different motivating factors for people, and so a generalization is hard, but I would say that a lot of people do understand that stronger neighborhood connections actually add to your quality of life.
In the back. Yes, you. Most of the way back.
Yeah. This is also for Judy. I kind of going off what Chris was talking about. Is there a specific neighborhood, like in terms of demographics, that you find to be more successful with the volunteering than others, or is it really just across the board, regardless of
No, it's really across the board, and that's a very good question. From the low wealth to the high wealth, everything in between, it's just an individual thing. Like I've discovered there are people in every neighborhood that are kind of get into this and start the ball rolling. And there's also something in this for everybody. Some people like to work with tools. Some people like to host parties. Some people like to crunch data. Some people like to go door to door. There's just there are things for everybody. So it's across the board, I'd say.
John.
My question is for Chris. I really admire the way your organization tries to hold the line to, avoid continuing the legacy of environmental injustices. Do you also have a vision for what it might look like to create a more just green economy? Or if you don't, just what are some of the principles?
Why with the easy questions, John? Do you have an idea of what that would look like in?
You didn't kill his buzz, Chris.
Yeah, no. Well, I think the thing that I would focus on, and I think the thing that's exciting about what Judy has talked about, is that Judy is making folks in all of the communities that she's attempting to work with stakeholders. and involving them in a central way in the work that she's doing. Because in that way, you not only can further involve them such that they can go and sort of force multiply, teach other people in the community about the ways that you can be more energy efficient and be sustainable, but also you're going to hear their voices during the course of those conversations. And you're going to be able at that point to be guided by what their interests are going to be. And that doesn't mean that you only hear those voices. The situation in Greensboro is a situation where we're going to decide what is good for Northeast Greensboro. We have this wonderful business opportunity for you. Won't you be delighted when we come to your neighborhood with this? That almost, right there you're dead. Because at that point you're not involving folks, engaging folks in a real sense. And if you only come in later, as some city council people did, to try to gauge their interest, you're not going to be able to do it at that point. So I don't really know that that's a model for what a green energy economy would look like. But I think that it is a model from how you start that discussion and have that discussion such that it, meets the environmental imperatives that we're all interested in and all motivated and animated by, but in such a fashion that it is sustainable, that it can be force multiplied, and that it also doesn't run over members of your community.
Sir.
I have a question for Judy. You mentioned that those things to wrap up the water heater and things to seal the doors, there are also things to caulk around windows or plastic for the windows. Your organization also provides that for the neighborhoods?
No, and yes. What we do is, if there are other people in the community that are interested in contributing to that, it provides a magnet through which to do that, but that's not what we typically do. So we, in the more low wealth areas, sometimes we'll get somebody to contribute $1,000, for example. We've had this happen, to provide $1,000 worth of supplies to do as many houses as you can in this particular low wealth neighborhood. But without that, we rely on the neighbors themselves to pay for these. Now, we are also in Warren County, which, if you were here this morning, you heard about that as one of the beginning places for the national environmental justice movement. And we've had, when we went to Warren County, 4 of the local hardware stores stepped up and provided a lot of materials for our key volunteers for free. So there's a lot of different kinds of partnerships that occur, but that's a partnership. It's not we don't normally do that.
Yes.
Following up on John's question, could you, in your bio it says that you work in a community lawyering format. Can you just talk about that?
And that's sort of why I ran home to safe ground when John asked a difficult question there and just sort of said, all right, I hear John's question. I think I can kind of answer it based on what I know. I mean, we work in a community lawyering model at SCSJ, and there are a number of different organizations nationwide that work in that model. And the way that I describe that is everybody, if you've worked in a law firm, I worked in a law firm in undergrad, a couple law firms, is familiar with what I call the voice of God attorney, who walks into a room and is going to find the problems that his clients have and destroy those problems. They are going to be solved, and you don't need to talk. I already know what we're going to do. Stay in your seat. I'll call you. It'll be done. That is a very typical sort of old school model of being a lawyer. I'm the attorney you came to me for my value add now. Sit back and relax. We're going to take care of this. I think that there's probably some instances, tax lawyers should do that, Our model is, there's nothing wrong with being a tax lawyer. I'm going to stress that. But when you're working with communities, such as we work with that are low wealth communities, predominantly here in North Carolina, African American communities that don't have tons of great interactions with attorneys. They have bad interactions with attorneys, or they don't have a lot of interactions with attorneys. But they're also dealing with problems that have been like that landfill was a problem for their parents and sometimes their grandparents. And I, as a white guy from Macon, Georgia, am never going to understand what living next to a landfill is like. And I should not be guiding that litigation. I should not be putting together a legal strategy because I don't know the players in Greensboro and I don't know the impact of living next to that landfill. Does that mean that I'm a wallflower? No, I'm not, obviously. And I have some legal expertise I want to bring to bear. But understanding and being guided by your client's keen appreciation of the problem and their strategic and tactical insights in how you go about realizing their goals, not your goals. That's what the community lawyering format is about to me.
Let's thank both our panelists.
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.